Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on a bin of red wiggler worms, and the system has been fed 12 times overall, but the last 10 feedings were fed in a method that I refer to as pocket feedings. And that just means that we're feeding in the corner of the bin each time rather than the normal way of just dropping the food down in the middle. And after my most recent shuffling of my bins to make room for more and to eliminate the old stuff, now the pocket fed or corner fed system is actually situated in the corner. So why don't we get that system up onto the bench? I'll slip on a glove and we're going to get them fed. I normally use one of these coffee filters as a marker to show where we last fed. But last time we didn't use one of these. We used a piece of folded up white printer paper, triangularly shaped to make it match with what we normally use. And it was positioned where we last fed, right over here. And, well, I'm not sure if it's just the nature of the delicious foods that were placed in underneath it or what, but for whatever reason, there's really no sign of the feeding zone indicator. However, there is clear evidence of a lot of worm activity there with all the nice fresh casting deposited there. So what we would normally find is the remnants of a feeding zone indicator right here, but no sign of it. So they've done away with it. And it looks like that corner right there has been really busy as well, which we definitely noticed last time too. So busy that you could even see some worm activity over there when we last checked. And there was some food scraps over there too. So I'm wondering what we're going to find as far as food scraps go. I think there was only a 9-day interval between the feedings last time versus the 14-day interval today. And you know what? Before we get too far along, I've covered most of the stats on here already as far as the number of feedings and how many of those feedings have been pocket feedings, but I don't think we mentioned the age of the bin yet. 150 days. So now that we've taken care of the statistical overview of the system's information, I think we could dive in and get our hands a little bit dirty. These leaves that you see out here on the top surface, these leaves were applied 2 feedings ago. And what we did in the last check-in was we collected all the leaves into a little pile in the middle so that we can inspect all the corners without stirring in all of this nice leafy matter. And there was so much of it remaining that we were able to pretty much spread it back out and cover the top surface once again with this stuff. But I figured on this go around, perhaps we could use this stuff as the sort of foundational bedding to place beneath the feeding, because the stuff has just been getting seasoned and, you know, primed for just that over the past couple check-ins. 23 days now, if you think about it, 3+ weeks, 3.5 weeks. So since that was the last place we fed, today's feeding is going to continue in a clockwise fashion. So pocket feeding number 11 will go right into there. But before we do that, let's follow tradition, as I like to do, and backtrack to see how they've done with the assortment of cucumber, I believe, was in here, maybe some Brussels sprout leaves, a variety of different green veggie matter that was placed into this corner just based on the fact that the feeding zone indicator has been nibbled away. It was probably a good clear sign that it's a busy corner, although I suppose the potential existed for us to come in here and find that the worms had already depleted what we had given them, and they might have already moved on to search for other things. But we're definitely seeing a good residual population of worms in here, as well as some of the bedding that was placed in below the food. We took some of my shredded paper cardboard mix, and that's prepared with leaves as well, so, and dampened, so it's a really nice bedding material that was placed below the feeding. So it's not too surprising that a good portion of it has been consumed as well. Definitely see leftovers of it. This looks to me like a piece of corn cob. I could tell just from the feeling, or just from touching it, the way it feels and its shape and everything. And just from the way it crumbles too. So I think just based on what we did to it now, we're not going to recognize that as corn cob any longer after this. But you know what, let's, you know what, I see something that might resemble leftover vegetable matter. I really didn't expect to see leftovers of the last feeding, but maybe that's just like the very, very thin skin of some cucumber or something that remains here. But other than that, I don't really see anything. But I think we could just return the contents of that corner back to where we found it to let it continue. You know, I noticed how this system was still covered with plastic, but even a couple of the systems that are younger than this have already had their top coverings of plastic swapped out with paper. And with the assumption that we would probably find a good bit of moisture in here, I already preemptively grabbed a piece of newspaper that I envisioned as our replacement top covering for this system. So I'm going to make sure that that plastic that was on here doesn't have any worms stuck to it. Maybe I can even scrape off some of the leaves that are adhering to it, but it's not going to go back on as the top cover any longer. We're going to swap out the plastic and in its place cover with paper only. And now going back 2 feedings, I think even last time when we came in here to put in the last feeding 14 days ago, even then we saw pretty much no leftovers of whatever the previous feeding had been. So I had no reason to believe that there'd be any leftovers there now, but we're sort of following our typical mode of operating in this system, is to check every corner regardless of what we expect to find there. So let's continue our counterclockwise reverse loop through the system to see what we see over here. Over here we saw so much worm activity still last time that we might have even grabbed a handful of this material just to sort of bring it up close to the camera to get a nice view of a nice pile of worms squirming in my hand here. So I guess we could do it again here a little bit today. It's pretty wild. Sometimes when I do this, we continue to see worms all over the place, but in this case, I guess there's just so many castings beginning to pile up over here that they had plenty of material to withdraw into, and at this point I don't even see hardly any worms, perhaps 1 or 2, but they've all very quickly jumped down into the material. So none of them really left my hand, they're all right there still. And I think because of the high degree of moisture in here, I think that's got a lot to do with just how lively and healthy these worms are. It's probably got to do with, you know, the moisture translating into them having an abundance of oxygen in their systems, enabling them to be pretty lively. Because the moisture that the worms come in contact with is their source of oxygen, so they don't breathe in air. They don't have lungs. They manage to absorb the oxygen that they need through their skin, and it's extracted from the oxygen that's contained within the moisture that they come in contact with. So that leads us to the corner that is getting fed today over here. So I moved aside our feeding zone indicator. So the other part of us just extracting the contents of this corner to see what's going on is also making space for today's feeding, which I don't think I've mentioned what they're getting today. It's a yummy treat, banana and watermelon rinds, and watermelon has kind of been the de facto menu item for a number of feedings now in a number of my systems, because I got an entire uneaten watermelon from my sister. Actually, you know, now that I come to think of it, it was only a half of a watermelon, plus the rinds of the portion of the watermelon that they had tasted and not liked, so they ended up trashing the portion of it that they didn't like, or maybe they ate it and just didn't want to eat more. I don't know the exact details, but I was given a half of a watermelon, as well as some of the rinds of the other half of it. I don't know why. I think in some of my other videos where I made mention of the watermelon, I might have talked about it being an entire watermelon, but now I'm just reminded of the fact that it was basically a half of a watermelon that I received. But even so, that's just a huge amount of food. So I've got probably about half of what I have already dished out to other worm bins that were fed with this stuff. So I've still got a little bit of work to do away with what remains of that stuff. And giving it to these guys is part of my plan for doing away with it. So all that lovely leafy matter that we scraped up and collected off the top of the system is going right down there into the feeding zone. And I've got this napkin here. I thought maybe we could even use this napkin as foundational bedding too, to complement the leafy matter that's down there. And you know, this stuff came out of my freezer, and once this stuff begins to thaw out, it's going to drop a whole bunch of moisture down into the feeding zone. So I think having some dry paper down there might even be a good idea. Why don't I grab another one? I've got a number of these soiled napkins here. What is this? Somebody check their lipstick on here? I get these napkins from my mom's house, and perhaps on one of her ladies' night dinners, one of her girlfriends might have checked her makeup or something, but I didn't notice that until now, so that was interesting. But yeah, we can proceed with dropping in today's yummy portion of watermelon and banana. And if you ask me, this is the type of feeding that's going to leave no leftovers. Maybe a little bit of this green skin of the watermelon, but I've got a feeling the majority of what we're putting in here now is going to be gone in no time. And perhaps that also means that our feeding zone indicator will once again get consumed in its entirety and not be there for us to turn to as a guide to help us understand where the last feeding was applied. And man, oh man, is there a lot of moisture in here. I think there is a pretty good benefit to allowing this system to begin kicking off a little bit of moisture. Very humid here in my wormery, and perhaps for that reason we shouldn't really expect to see a whole lot of drying or evaporation, but it would be nice to see a little bit at least, because it does seem to me like this system might be getting to the point where it's perhaps a little bit overly damp. Well, overly damp for my liking at least, because I'm sure if you were to ask these worms what they think about it, they would say, yeah, we love it, give us more, make it even more damp if you can. Because worms really love the moisture, and you can't really blame them. So, you know, I've managed to get a good portion of the material that was adhering to this plastic off, and I'm going to leave it out here on the bench to dry so that it's even easier in a short while to scrape off what remains. What is this? Oh, roly-poly. But he doesn't look too healthy. Perhaps, I think we've got ourselves a deceased roly-poly. I expected the little guy to roll up into a little tiny ball as soon as I touched him, because that's what they do in a defensive posture. But the color of that little guy didn't seem right either. So, you know what? I guess as a little insulating layer between the really damp stuff in this bin and the dry piece of paper that we're placing out as the replacement top cover, we can also lay in some fresh leaves, since we just used what was left of the leafy top covering that had been in here. We're using it as foundational bedding for the feeding. I think we can even give them some more. So on can come our replacement top covering, which is only going to be on here briefly. I'll come back later once that top covering plastic is dried so I can scrape off what's on it and return it to the bin. And going forward, we're going to be using paper top covering here, allowing the system to breathe and maybe even kick off some of its moisture. So I've got a few things I've got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away here, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.